you very much, Sue. All right, I'd like to welcome John Villasenor, who will moderate the keynote plenary. Professor Villasenor is a researcher at Stanford, at the Brookings Institution, and at UCLA. And as one of our Luskin scholars, the idea behind this convening was his originally. So thank you, John. Welcome.
This is working here. Hello, hello, thank you. So thank you very much. I think if we could have our three panelists come up, that would be terrific, because we've got a panel session coming up. And while they come up, I'll give a little background on where we are. So just time check, we're supposed to have a break. The breakout sessions start at 10 o'clock. We're supposed to have a break at 9:45. I'll probably ask people's indulgence to push our finish time on this panel a few minutes past our original 9:45 finish, but I'll try to keep us back on schedule. And so the way this is going to work is I'm going to briefly introduce each of our three panelists. Each one of them will give a brief set of opening remarks, probably about 5 minutes or so. I'll ask a couple of questions. And then we'd like to have some time to have some dialogue, because, of course, you're here hopefully not to just listen, but also to engage on this incredibly important conversation we have. I'll just mention also, having been involved in the planning of this conference, I coincidentally was at a conference called RSA. It's one of the biggest cybersecurity conferences in San Francisco a week or two ago, and doing an eye scan of the people at the conference. I mean, I don't know the stats, but it seemed like about 90% of the attendees were male. And so here we have a conference in one of the topics, cybersecurity, where there's the technology topics, where there's some of the most incredible growth opportunities, some of the most important business opportunities in the next decade, and we have this incredibly dramatic misrepresentation or underrepresentation. So it's a problem that quite literally is in your face if you're out in the tech world, like many of us in this room. So let me start by briefly introducing the panelists here. Of course, you've already had an introduction to Sue Gardner. Valerie Aurora, who's sitting immediately to her left, is Director of Training and a co-founder of the ADA Initiative, which is a nonprofit dedicated to promoting women in technology. And in addition to doing that, she created and teaches something called the ADA Initiative Ally Skills Workshop, which teaches men simple ways to support women in open technology and a culture that promotes gender balance. And so she's also an experienced software engineer, was a leading file systems developer, researcher, and consultant for over a decade. To her left is Jane Margolis, who is with us here she works here at UCLA in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. She focuses on social inequities in education, the production of inequality, and how fields become segregated, and she's authored 2 award-winning books on underrepresentation in computer science education. One was called Unlocking the Clubhouse, Women in Computing, and her more recent book was called Stuck in the Shallow End, Education, Race, and Computing. And that examines the disparities in learning opportunities, especially for low-income African-American and Latino students at the high school level. And then last, but certainly not least, to her left, we have Monique Morrow, who is with Cisco, and is what was the first CTO of Cisco Services until late last year. Now is with a Cisco organization called New Frontiers in Engineering. She's had a 14-plus year career, if I've got that right, in Cisco, where she's worked in everything from customer advocacy to corporate consulting engineering, and has worked on Cisco in terms of Asia Pacific, and done a lot of work across the organization. So obviously, the 3 people who have just come up, along with Sue Gardner, we've got just an incredible set of expertise up here. So what I'll do is I'll start off by asking a few questions, and again, maybe people can think of some questions they would like to ask here. And in asking these questions, of course, anybody who wants to, we don't need to go exactly in order, and please feel to jump in. So, that's right. Before the questions that they're going to do, they're okay. So, in terms of your 5-minute remarks,
You have a position.
You have a position. What do you want to? Who wants to go first here? Anybody?
I was going to go first.
You're going to go first.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the procedure here is that each one of us is going to talk for about 5 minutes and then open up to questions.
Right.
So, first of all, Sue, I want to thank you for your remarks. They were very reflective, and they got me thinking a lot and figuring out, sort of rethinking what I want to put out here first. So I really want to thank you. My concerns are that, first of all, I study how fields become segregated and how inequality gets reproduced in our country. And I feel that technology and computer science is a window into how we can understand how segregation happens and how inequality gets reproduced. And so there are several things that come off of that. As our day goes on, I really urge us to think about not just gender, because in a way, I feel while there's so much misogyny and deep biases around gender, and it is such a problem that we've had worldwide, I don't think that we can only focus on gender. I think that we must look at the issues of race and socioeconomics as well. First of all, women, you could say, and I know this may be very controversial, but women, in a way, to look at diversity just through the lens of women, it usually translates into white, middle-class, educated women. And in a way, that's low-hanging fruit, even though it's been such a difficult nut to crack. So that's really, even the low-hanging fruit is a challenge. But I don't think if we solve the low-hanging fruit problem of getting more middle-class white women educated at MIT, Harvard, and Stanford, that is going to necessarily mean that the race and socioeconomic problems are going to follow. I don't think it happens. And there are some people who think that. Let's solve the gender problem first, and then race and socioeconomics will happen. And I think they are two really hard problems that have to be seen as a whole. And we have to always check ourselves when we're just talking about women and think about who we're talking about and the problems that we're talking about. So I really urge us. I know that, I am very aware that we are all white people sitting on this panel. And I just want to say that the Luskin Center reached out to people that I said suggested were very active on the issue of race and technology and computer science, and those leaders wanted to be here and just couldn't be here. But this is what we're with, and I think that we have to really put the question of race and socioeconomics out on the table. And the other thing is that that sort of connects to the work that I do, which is I work with LAUSD, the second largest school district in the country, looking at why so few African American, Latinos, and females are learning computer science. And what we found was incredible disparities in learning opportunities. And in schools with high numbers of African American and Latino students, what was considered computer science was really typing and word perfect and internet searching. And schools in more wealthy areas had the full gambit of computer science, the computational thinking, the problem solving, that is really the necessary preparation for jobs and for industry. So we have to consider the inequities in what I call preparatory privilege. So a lot of the people that are in industry right now, and even the women, come from really preparatory privilege backgrounds where they have had the education, the maybe going to summer camps, the parents in their families that were encouraging them in science and math. And what about all the other rich potential talent that is not being tapped? And so the whole issue of educational inequality, when we think about policy, has to be sort of in this mix as well. And so it's just an urgent plea that we try to wrestle with all these complexities as we're spending the day talking.
Yes, mic check. Can you hear me in the back? Great, fantastic. Thank you, Sue and Jane, for preparing so much of the ground. This is just such an important opportunity that I actually prepared my remarks, so it feels special. So. I wanted to say, what we are doing in corporate America today, you will be unsurprised, isn't working for women in tech. Take the HR department. Frida Kapoor Klein, the founder of the Level Playing Field Institute, recently published an article entitled, "Now What? How to Create Fair Companies After the Ellen Powell Verdict." In that article, she said, I quote, "A recurring theme from employees is the absence of a safe place to go for problem solving, advice, and informal resolution. Human resources or people ops departments are alternately seen as spineless, on the side of management, or in the worst case scenario, as the place you go when you want to end your career." End quote. So that's a pretty hard-hitting quote, so let me just say that I have spoken to many HR professionals who are the exceptions to this rule. At the same time, the vast majority of women in tech that I know agree vehemently with Frida Kapoor Klein's characterization of most HR departments. In our personal experience, most HR departments do precisely what management hires them to do: protect the company and the most powerful people within the company, who are usually men. We have to change this culture of back-scratching and complacency if we want women to stop leaving tech in droves. I have a list of specific ideas for how to change HR departments for the better, but first I want to call out explicitly why this kind of change is going to be so hard. The people who have risen to power inside companies based in part on the unearned privilege of being male or being white know at some level that they don't deserve their jobs. They realize consciously or unconsciously that they are only in their positions because of their unfair advantages over more qualified people who are part of marginalized groups. And let's be real and honest about what it will take to create equality in our lifetimes. Getting equal representation of women of all races and people of color of all genders in technology will require demoting or firing a lot of white men from their very well-paid jobs. If you expect these well-paid, over-promoted white men to peacefully give up their jobs or voluntarily demote themselves to their actual level of competence, I'm afraid to say you will be waiting a long time for equality. So, let me go back to Frida Kapoor Klein. Thank you for writing this, Frida. She also says, "Equally unhelpful are outmoded diversity policies that have dominated and failed corporate America. Policies that require employees to report behavior they consider inappropriate, triggering an automatic HR investigation that often exacerbates the problem. More often than not, they ensure that no one comes forward. Who would file a formal complaint against her CEO for making a sexist or racist comment?" End quote. The Level Playing Field Institute has many suggestions for changing the ways companies operate internally, as well as many public policy suggestions. But here are a few of my favorites in the area of reporting and responding to harassment. Create a relatively independent position within the company of ombuds or ombudsperson, I had to look that up, someone whose job is to take reports of problems and fix them. Another suggestion, get rid of mandatory reporting and zero-tolerance anti-harassment policies, which mainly discourage reporting because people don't want to harm the person they're reporting that badly. Create an anonymous problem reporting system accessible to all employees. You'll hear about a lot more problems that way. And this is one that several of my friends have been experimenting with, and successfully. Create an alternative informal reporting system that doesn't escalate to a full-on HR incident and allows employees to solve small problems before they become big problems. And last but not least, we should found and fund our own women-led, explicitly feminist companies and grow them until they put the old-fashioned sexist companies out of business. Thanks.
Wow. So I'm absolutely thrilled. By the way, can you hear me? Because this is kind of an unfriendly wearable. And the last time I was in a chair this high, I think I was an infant. But I have also prepared my comments coming from a corporation, okay? So Cisco published its diversity statistics in 2014. We have to be data-driven. It's available to you. You can go for it. But this was based on 10 years of our study. And the findings were what Sue absolutely articulated, and they were horrifying. And that is, like most of our peers, and we were about this was based on a 74,000 person employee environment. The workforce is overwhelmingly comprised of Caucasian and Asian men. 77% of that employee base is male, with 54% of the total workers male and female combined. The number of employees identifying themselves as Hispanic and African American was 5% and 3% respectively. For the first time, we did release, and what we found was a full 85% of the company's technical roles are filled by men. And when it comes to managers, just 19% are female. Now, our CTO corporately and CSO, Padma Shri Warrior, went on the record to say, the worst thing for people to say is that it's going to take time. Okay, that's the worst thing. In technology, we pride ourselves on the pace of change. Why can't we talk about the same pace of change when it comes to women in leadership? So we believe, and we're experimenting as a lot of our peers in the industry, is that the way to change is to start to induce the change in a culture and to recognize the biases and call them out. And so we have a program, actually it's more than a program, it's really Cisco Men for Inclusion at Cisco. And that is really to look at women and very aware look at women and people of color as business partners, and to look, and for women to look, and people of color to look at these men for reciprocity. So you have to start out with 50-50. You have to start out with some goal, some metric that you can target against. In fact, we talked about Cisco Men for Inclusion at a United Nations event, and they were very, very intrigued. So I went on record to say, you know, you've heard the famous quote from Madeleine Albright, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help women. And by the way, I will tell you, the people who've helped me have been men, okay? But I also said there's a special place in heaven for men who help women. So I think that's something that this is the power of the and. You can't do it as an or here. It's got to be and. So to the point, we believe that we have to call out, there will be, you know, you have the mixed interview boards, what do the promotions look like, some of the things that you call out for change. But I'm going to be really radical here. I think the root cause is, I think the way to change is to hit your pocket. What if I were to give you restricted stock options based on the behavior we want to see, right? As an organization, to individuals, I think that's the way you start inducing change. Not just because of programs that we are looking at in terms of calling out the biases, and really putting people on record to do that. I think we need to think about being what Ben Verdmüller had articulated about a week ago, or a couple of weeks ago in a blog. Let's think about being a full stack employer. I think it's also the composite of the way we work. You know, we're very aggressive behavior. What if you were given black marks or whatever you want to call it, penalties for not taking your vacation, for reading your email when you are on vacation? What about women who are trying to get on board when they're after they've had a baby? I know that I met Laszlo Bach, who is the SVP of people operations at Google, and they're looking at 5 months. He wanted 6 months, but 5 months. Maternity and paternity leave, right, for your partners, etc. I think we need to change that behavior set. I think it's also the way we articulate in Wall Street. You know, it's this very, very aggressive behavior. We have to change the tone such that because I have male colleagues who are tired. In fact, one male colleague told me he does not want his daughter to be in this industry. Not at, he's not at Cisco, he's in another company because he's tired. And I think that's, again, it's a bigger call to action in terms of the way we are addressing the problem from an organization and from a society perspective. I live on the other side of the Atlantic, by the way. I live in a country called Switzerland. And I can tell you, globally, this is a hot issue. I'm working also with, the UN women. You have the He for She program that we have to be part of the whole global policy on this issue. But let me just suggest that we are very aware as a company that we want to induce that change. We also want to track it in terms of the bias with Cisco Men for Inclusion. It becomes part of the system. Our executive vice president in engineering actually spoke at the IEEE. How many of you were at the IEEE Women in Engineering Conference in San Jose, California this past week? He actually said, I'm going to be the voice of women who are not heard. I'm going to call it out in my own direct reports when something is inappropriate. You have to start with that. But I'll go back to the challenge here, and the opportunity is, let's do the following. Let's award, get restricted stock options to great organizations. Let's have a Nobel Prize in the industry to organizations that have achieved that 50-50, something of equal that you are actually touting. I think we have to think about it in a different way. And you start recognizing the organizations. I had the pleasure to meet Gina Davis, who's an actress, who's trying to change she and I hold a individual award in gender equality and mainstreaming, and she's trying to change the way media represents itself on television. I mean, for women. How we, or how anybody, is different or represented, especially in technology. What about the cartoon characters? I have a colleague who, and one last point, I have a colleague who is a VP in engineering in my organization. When she was growing up in New Delhi, she was asked by the teacher, what is it you want to do? She's very, very interested in cartoon characters, heroes. She said, I want to be a superwoman hero in a cartoon. And the response from the teacher was to get her married pretty quickly because she's an anomaly. Well, she's a great engineering executive in our company. But those are the types of things that I think we should challenge our system with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, no.
Okay. I'm gonna. We don't have a whole lot of time, so I'm gonna ask one question, and then I'm gonna open it up to the audience. So if you can take a few moments, if you're interested in thinking of a question. So after we finish this one, we'll have some questions. My question is the following: there's obviously plenty that organizations can do within those organizations, but at the public policy level, what can outside of organizations, what can, for example, governments, or what should governments, and what public policies should cities, local governments, the federal government implement that might tangibly address this problem, especially given what Sue and others have observed, that all of the sort of thing, or many of the things suggested to date, haven't seemed to really move the needle. If anyone has any thoughts on what we should do at the public policy level, not necessarily inside of organizations. Any thoughts from any of our panelists on that?
Well, I have a thought, which is, well, first of all, in terms of change, I note the fact that for many years, women's organization had asked companies to make their statistics public, and no one did it for a long time. And then Jesse Jackson came in to threaten big public protest, and then all of a sudden the statistics were being released. So in terms of public policy, I wonder where social protest, comes into the whole picture. But I also wonder why, and this is a personal story, but it affects my question about public policy. In the 70s, I got a summer job as a telephone operator for the young people here. I don't know if you know, telephone operator. And I was a telephone operator, and then there was affirmative action that came along with the phone company. And affirmative action was the government, the U.S. government, ordered the phone company to put women into male traditional jobs. So they came around to us telephone operators, all women, and asked us which ones of us wanted to be telephone installers. For young people here, telephone installers, the people that climb up the telephone poles, you know, and make all the connections on the telephone poles to the house, to the basement, to bring dial tone for your landline. Okay, so I volunteered to do that, and I had been raised by a family, boys and girls can do everything the same and everything. But I knew nothing about working with tools. I knew nothing about electricity. I knew nothing about dial tone or phone company. And the phone company had sent us to school and trained us to work as telephone installers. And so I went to school, and I had to go to pole climbing school, and I learned that, oh my God, this is not complicated. You know those old telephone closets that you open up and there are all these wires and they look so intimidating, you think you have to be a genius to know this? Well, it's just color-coded. You know, red goes to red, yellow goes to yellow, green goes to green. And it was like one of these most unbelievable experiences for me to realize that, you know, with some training, you know, with the phone company had to do it. They were ordered to do it. And so I got so into this, you know, I ended up delaying college, going back to school, and I worked for 7 years as a telephone lineman installer. And everything, so much of my orientation about public policy comes from, first of all, I'm from the 60s, so the way we created change was Vietnam War, civil rights movement. We went out to the streets. That's how we changed things. I wonder, that's so outmoded now, except for let us bring Baltimore into the room today. I mean, people are exasperated. They feel that change is so slow. They're at their wits' end. So where does social protest come into this public policy discussion? And where does someone forcing these companies to do something, like, you know, my old enemy, Ma Bell, the phone company, who, you know, actually did it and brought women in. So I just throw that out. I'm not a public policy expert. I'm education policy, and we have so many problems. How can we have education policy so that African American and Latino kids get the same education as white middle class kids?
So I have an observation. You do have a CTO in the United States, Megan Smith.
Yes.
So perhaps she can help here in that vein. One observation I have living in Europe is that you see probably controversial things happening from our perspective, but maybe it's not so controversial. How many of you are from Germany, perhaps, or know Germany? And so, you know, Angela Merkel actually, they've actually put in policy that so many women have to be on a board, okay? 30%, absolutely. In some of the Nordic countries, it's also mandated. In some countries, customers will not talk to you unless you are representative of the people that they want to talk, you know, in terms of gender or whatever. So that's really, really important. I did have a chance to have a dialogue with the former commissioner, European Commissioner Nellie Kroes, who was for Digital Divide. I don't know if you know her background, 70 plus years old, a PhD in economics, and was told when she wanted her first job, by all means, you can't be married and have a baby. And what she said, trying to get more women in technology in the workforce, was she was going to go on record to mandate that you would have to have a certain percentage of women in the workforce. And her, I'm paraphrasing her, but fundamentally she said, some people believe in life after death. Until I see it, I have to actually start to induce that change from a policy perspective. So that's an observation that's happening. So I think you need to think about, you know, what governments are doing from a perspective of legislation in this direction. And I think also if we kind of take a step back, I mean, look at how you had the right to vote that was accorded here in the United States. It was legislated, right? So that type of thing you have to think about is in terms of a balance. That's just an observation from my perspective.
I'd like to expand briefly on your comment about quotas on corporate boards. The research shows that when you create quotas to even out the representation of underrepresented and people in the underrepresented and marginalized groups, you improve the quality of the board as measured by the profitability of the company. So I would strongly support creating quotas for corporate boards in the United States.
Any other comments? Okay. And does anyone have any questions from the floor here?
We've got mics up there, right?
Yeah, there's a mic up here if anyone. Yes, if you don't mind, please walking up to the microphone up here, otherwise people won't be able to hear you.
Oh, hi.
I'm Brenda Rothoff. I'm a professor of computer science at Santa Monica College. I also run a nonprofit, STEMYes.org. Some of the issues you guys are talking about are what I'm promoting. My STEMYes.org, a nonprofit, is to promote underrepresented minorities and women in STEM. And the way we're going to do this, my friends, is getting them at K through 8. Because what we're realizing is that we don't have the numbers, and we saw everything with your slide. We are losing them compared to 1984 in tech and STEM. Not so much in life sciences, physical sciences and technology for sure. So I have a PowerPoint presentation that explains it. I've got statistics. I've been doing my research with you. You will be amazed to see what's going on, and you'll be a little frightened too. And we've got to change it K through 8, but we've got to incentivize.
Absolutely.
And I love incentives. I love quotas. And we have to financially get down. My way of reaching out to the Hispanic community, and just so everybody knows, in March last month, we became the second state in the union to now have a higher Hispanic population than Caucasian. We are now 39% Caucasian, Hispanic, 38.8% Caucasian. We have got to reach out to the Hispanic community. We have got to reach out to them. We've got to start. And we have to do it K through 8. We have to get them young. And I've got my own ways of doing it. I've got avenues of change. I recognize the barriers. I say Hispanics, we go through God and soccer. And then what I'd like to do is figure out today how to get to the women.
Excuse me, I'm really uncomfortable with this speech.
I'm sorry, but I believe, and that's why I came today, because I feel like we really need to get out there with our kids.
And do you have a question for the panel?
Yeah, I really wanted to talk to you guys about what you're doing, what you think we could do for the K-3.
Okay, so the question is what can be done? What can be done to promote?
Underrepresented minorities and women in K-3.
Okay, thank you very much.
So our corporation, as an example, is involved in the H2020 outreach K through 8. We are absolutely engaged throughout the communities in the United States. I do want to take a step back, however, and that is I'm on the Strategic Advisory Board for the School of Computer Science at NC State, North Carolina State University. The interim chair is a woman. And what I do find out is that women who are into computer science, and just as a call out, when they get a B for the first time, they feel like they failed, and they drop. So I think it's also about how we're grading too.
Any other thoughts on K through 8, reaching people in that age group? Yes, no?
But
Okay.
we are absolutely incented to go through K through 8. We absolutely are. I mean, we are very, very bold on it.
Okay, well, I'm going to close then with one final question. I'd ask that we try to keep answers fairly brief so we can not push the other sessions. But clearly, as Sue and demonstrated, and as we all know, things haven't really changed. In fact, they've gotten worse. And so from the standpoint, is it that companies simply don't prioritize it enough? Because you're not going to find any CEO of any company who doesn't get up there and say he or she believes firmly in the need to improve gender balance, but in fact it isn't happening. And is that because there's not enough prioritization? Is it they're not interested, that they are interested, they're using the wrong methods? What's wrong? Why aren't companies doing what they say they want to do?
So companies are beginning to be very, very aware. Our CEO is very cognizant of it, and hence why we're moving, I think, directionally. We're in the right direction, I would say. The prioritization, in my opinion, is going to come when you start to incentivize, when you start to really, really hit the pockets, and I think that's going to be more important. I did ask a gentleman who was a CEO, he was working at Coca-Cola for 25 years and is in this space, and I asked him which CEOs absolutely get it, and he said CEOs with daughters who are outraged. That's it.
Any other comments?
So yeah, I feel like it's clearly a question of prioritization, right? It clearly is. I have had tons of conversations with colleagues of mine, people who run tech companies, including really big companies, and honestly, and I'm not going to name names, but honestly, what I found is they don't know shit about the issue. They just don't know anything, right? Like they say things like, "Oh my God, like I just don't understand why there are no more women," right? And I'm like, well, there's 200 fucking years of research, So, it is not sufficiently prioritized. There are some exceptions, and I think there's somebody here from eBay who I'm hoping will tell the eBay story at some point today in one of our sessions, because eBay, my understanding, has actually moved the needle, and they did it through the mechanisms that we have to make change in organizations, which are putting it in people's performance goals and holding them accountable for it, right? So that's what works, right? We are not doing that. There are reasons we're not doing it, because people don't care enough, right? But what I think, and I want to go back to what Jane said at the beginning of her remarks, because I've been reading some interesting stuff lately, and Lee Honeywell is here, and Lee, if you know the name of the blogger that I'm talking about, would you tweet it or something, or tell me afterwards, and I will. But there's a woman doing some really interesting writing about what it is like, what the tech culture of work is like, right? And what she has identified, which I think is super interesting, is what Jane said, which is the culture doesn't just not work for white women, right? The culture also doesn't work for Latino people. It doesn't work for African American people. It doesn't work for parents. It doesn't work for older men, right? And so you have to ask yourself, for whom does this culture work, right? And it seems like it is designed and built and shaped and evolved around the needs of a very, very narrow slice of the population, right? What that tells us is that reaching any kind of equality is going to require a significant shift in the culture, the internal culture of the companies, how they do their work. As you said, how they are about aggression, right? How they do code review, right? How people get promoted. What kind of hours do they work? Must they live, 18 hours a day for the organization? Must they be a hacker who stays up all night every night? If it's only working for a tiny segment of the population, it's not really working. It's not really healthy, right? And so, going back to what Val said, what's required to make change is significant, reassessment of everything that this industry is. And in achieving that, people will need to lose their jobs and be demoted. As Val said, they will need to give up an enormous amount of power, right? I don't see that happening easily.
So so sorry, Jane, I'd love to make this point. The current system doesn't even work for young, single white men. They hate their lives. They're very unhappy. I teach a lot of workshops, and they come to me and they're like, really, wow, I should leave work? There's a distinction. I had a young woman who had an epiphany. I should have work-life distinction in my life. And I was just like, oh my God. And I finally understood your ownership in a company. If you're a software engineer, you get a certain amount of stock and it vests over a period of time. That vesting does not speed up if you work 80 hours a week. There's a strong incentive from the people who invest in these companies, these are called venture capital companies, to wring out every ounce of work they can get in the shortest period of time. And young people are easier to exploit. They're less likely to have families. They are less likely to have learned the lesson that they're going to burn themselves out and they are going to get nothing. And so that's part of why they're so attractive to these companies. I think that what we need is large-scale advocacy to change our investment decisions, to divest from venture capital firms that fund companies with this kind of work culture, that demand this kind of, yes, and that this can actually be started with, and this is Lee Honeywell's idea. We should probably just join us on stage. A lot of public pension funds are invested in large VC firms, a lot of universities, and we can look to the past, to the fight against apartheid in South Africa, to see how well divestment campaigns work. I personally, in my company, when we make software purchasing decisions, we go and we look at the board of directors of the companies that we are considering paying money to. We look at the composition of the board of directors, we look who they're connected to, we look to what public statements they've made about race and gender and technology, and we make purchasing decisions with our money based on that.
Absolutely. In fact, it goes to how you qualify your suppliers, how you qualify your, look at your advisory boards of customers for the past 5 years, and what does that look like? I think now you have to really step up the game to say, look, if you're not going to be in this game together, we have to look at how we're going to do business with you. Laszlo Bock has gone on record to say some companies make a lot of money being cruel to its people. And maybe that's the way, he was quoting a company in China, you had the suicides, people jumping out of the window, and one of the fixes was to put nets there, right? So we do have to, I absolutely agree with what has been said thus far. There is cultural change that's happening. Organizations are moving to that cultural change. We're experimenting, candidly speaking. We are. And I think this is, if anything, this is a lightning rod for the change that must happen, and we're all in this together to transform the society we live in.
So thank you very much. Let's give our panel a big hand. And of course, they'll be here during the rest of the day, so there's opportunities to engage.